There's a lot of words that can be used to describe Imsa's return to Detroit, and the word clean is certainly not one of them. From the drop of the green flag, this race was plagued by full course yellow after full course yellow, and was full of plenty of incidents that we're going to talk about. This is your Detroit Grand Prix recap. Before we even arrived in Detroit for this race, many had their concerns about the kind of racing that we would see at this new downtown circuit. After all, we'd become used to the more wide and more flowing Belle Isle circuit in recent years, and this was certainly considerably different than that. Early on in the weekend, it became very clear that this race was going to be a war of attrition. Traffic was going to be a huge factor, perhaps even bigger than we had thought, and that the times between the GTP class and the GTD Pro class were going to be even tighter than we initially anticipated. Over the early practice sessions of this race weekend, there were a handful of red flags that were deployed, but not really for any significant incidents, thankfully. Most of these were for debris on the track or cars that had gone into runoff areas and just needed a few moments to be able to turn back around and continue. So no destroyed race cars on a brand new street circuit is certainly good news on that front. But what it did highlight is that qualifying was going to be super critical to having a successful race weekend here. And as we went into the qualifying session, we would see the speed of the Corvettes carry over from what they showed at Laguna Seca, and they would lock out the front row of the GTD Pro class for the second race in a row. Here was Antonio Garcia who put the number 3 Corvette on pole with a 109.092 second lap and edged out his teammate by just over 0.3 of a second. Meanwhile, in GTP, there was drama in the closing minutes of the qualifying session, just as the fast laps were starting to be run by those cars. With just a couple minutes to go in qualifying, Pipo Derani looped his number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac around and would block the track. The resulting red flag would end the session and would also effectively send the 31 to the back of the GTP class, as his 2 fastest laps were going to be removed as a result of bringing out the red flag. However, this would come after the 2 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963s were able to get the fastest laps in of the session. Here was the number 6 of Nick Tandy, who put down a 105.390 second lap time to beat out the number 7 Porsche by just over 1/10 of a second. The chaotic nature of this Detroit track started to show itself in the qualifying session, and it certainly wouldn't take long for it to show that in the race as well. And we'd hardly have to wait a lap to experience our first full course yellow in the race as well, but it wasn't for a chaotic first corner. In fact, the opening corners of the race were actually pretty clean, but it was for the number 64 Ford Mustang, who lost power. I'm not really sure what happened here, but they never really got off the line. They were never able to get up to speed, and they ended up stalling on track just after the starting line, and a quick full course yellow had to be thrown. That wasn't the only problem for one of the hometown cars, as the pole-sitting number 3 Corvette had to box on the opening lap as they experienced alternator issues. After a lengthy stop on pit road that dropped them well out of contention, they would later rejoin the race. Now, this was a quick full course yellow, and once we got back to green flag racing, it would actually be our longest green flag stint of this race. Now, we did get some nice passes in here, and despite this being the longest green flag stint of the race, it would not be the cleanest, as right around the 25-minute mark of the race, while leading by a comfortable margin, the number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 driven by Nick Tandy overshot the entry into turn 3 on the end of the backstretch, went right into the back of the Conquest Racing Ferrari, and spun them around. I'm not going to elaborate too much on it right now, but I am going to talk about all of the incidents that took place in this race in just a few minutes. Now, this incident, despite throwing some debris on track, wasn't enough to bring out a full course yellow. However, Imsa would give Nick Tandy a penalty for the incident and take him from the race lead. After serving a rather short drive-through penalty here, after all, the Detroit pit road is very short. It only equated to about a 12-second time penalty. But after serving that penalty and everybody else coming down for regularly scheduled service over the course of this stint, Nick Tandy would be the last car on pit road. His pit stop would come at the absolute perfect time, as while he was on pit road, the second full course yellow of the race would come out and help return him to the front front of the field, even despite that penalty. This time the full course yellow was for the number 25 of Connor De Filippi, who had a couple of brushes with the wall after making his pit stop, but ultimately he hit the wall hard on the exit of turn 2, and this would end his day and bring out a full course yellow. At this point, I would say it was a pretty critical turning point in this race, as we'd bunch the field back up once again for what would end up being a very messy second half of the race. It all started right after the restart when the number 14 Vasser Sullivan Lexus made a dive up the inside into turn 3 on the leading number 4 Corvette. The dive of the number 14 combined with the 4 squeezing them to the inside pretty well into the wall caused some pretty hard contact between the two of them and resulted in heavy damage to the number 4 that would ultimately take them out of contention. Rexy was also caught up in this incident and would take some front splitter damage. However, they would leapfrog the 4 and the 14 to the lead in the GTD Pro class. Again, this would not bring out a full course yellow though. However, seconds later, a full course yellow would come out when the number 31 made an opportune dive up the inside of the number 85 going into turn 1, catching the rear of the 85, spinning them around and blocking the entire track. This caused a massive roadblock which immediately brought out a full course yellow, and we bunched the field back up again. Actually, a big shout out here to the track workers as well as the AMR safety crew, who did an incredible job at clearing the track very quickly and safely from all of these incidents and getting us back to green flag racing. And they were pretty darn busy in this race. After going green, the number 6 Porsche would initially bolt away from the field, but the number 10 would slowly reel them in. And on lap 56, the 10 that was now driven by Ricky Taylor had caught Mathieu Jaminet in the 6 and made a bold dive up the inside going into turn 3 to take the lead of the race. However, just moments later, and after a total of 18 minutes of green flag racing, the full course yellow would be deployed once again, this time for debris on the track. And this restart would set up perhaps the biggest hit of the day, as just a couple of laps after we went green, the number 31 and the 5 would get together with the number 5 going hard head first into the wall. The debris that this caused and the number 5 being sort of stranded in a runoff area would bring out the full course yellow for a 5th and final time. Again, a big shout out to all of the track workers and the AMR safety crew here. They did a great job of cleaning this wreck up in particular to get us back to green flag racing with just 7 minutes to go. We would go green once again, but the incidents weren't over. Again, with just a handful of laps to go, the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, who was eager to get onto the podium, got into the back of the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports McLaren and ultimately put them in the turn 3 wall. We would stay green for the final couple of laps to the end of this one, and when it was all said and done, the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura of Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque would go on to take the win. They were able to hold off the number 6 Porsche and the number 01 Cadillac, who rounded out the podium. In GTD Pro, it was Rexy who overcame that damage that they picked up earlier in the race to bring home the win. Following them home in second was another car that picked up heavy damage in that incident, the number 14 Vasser Sullivan Lexus, and rounding out the podium after some damage of their own when they hit the Pfaff McLaren was the Heart of Racing Aston Martin. On another note, it was an absolutely horrific day for all of the GM cars and the Ford entries. Well, I guess except for the 01 Cadillac, they were the only one that actually had a good day. But the 31 was caught up in multiple incidents over the course of this weekend. Meanwhile, the Corvettes and the Mustangs didn't fare any better. They all either ran into a mechanical issue or some sort of other issue during the race, and all of them ultimately finished at least a lap down. Now, there were a number of controversial incidents that took place in this race, and I want to talk about them a bit now. So I'm going to put on my judge's hat, since I just don't have one of those wigs that a judge wears kicking around. And let's hand out some rulings in some of these incidents. Alright, the first incident that we're going to look at here and make a ruling on was the first real incident of the race, and that was when the number 6 Porsche Penske of Nick Tandy ran into the back of the Conquest Racing Ferrari. We can see we're on board with the 6, and the Conquest Racing Ferrari significantly further ahead up the road. We see heavy into the braking zone, makes the commitment, kind of half commits up the inside, does it extremely late, nowhere even really close to being able to make this move sort of into this area here, and really not really a chance here. This is destined for catastrophe. The hard shunt there spins him around and continues on. Bit of a different view here. You can see just the late braking and kind of at this point, maybe looking at going up the inside here, but definitely not enough commitment to be able to make that happen. Just a poor move, really, at the end of the day, and Nick Tandy sends the Ferrari around. This is a pretty clear-cut penalty, and that is exactly what race control handed to the number 6 Porsche. Next incident that we have to look at and make a ruling on is between the 14 and the number 4 Corvette. We see the number 4 Corvette here. They were in the lead at the time. This is just after the restart, and again heading down into turn 3. So in the post-race interviews, Ben Barnicoat, who was driving the number 14 at the time, mentioned that Nicky Katzberg, who was driving the Corvette, may have broke a little bit early. It does, if we go back a little bit, it looks like maybe started getting on the brakes pretty early here. And Ben Barnicoat was not getting on the brakes clearly at the same point there. I think the problem where this incident arises is it's a clear send by the 14, who saw an opportunity to make a pass, but we see the Corvette slowly moves more and more over to the left to block this move as well and sort of make up for their mistake. Eventually, I mean, at this point, there's no real room for the 14 to make it through here. Like, there's a clear line that's kind of going here. The 14 is destined for the wall, but the 14 is also not backing out of it either. They hung in there for this entire move. I mean, I guess rightfully so. But at the same time, there was still a pretty significant amount of time left in this race. Ultimately, make contact with the wall, make contact with the 4 Corvette, and the 4 Corvettes really got the worst of it at the end of the day. They were the ones that ultimately fell out of contention. Another view here from Rexy. We can see these two kind of going at it. The Corvette's still on the brakes. It doesn't even look like the Lexus is on the brakes at this point when they're going into the barrier, although that just might be the view that we're looking at. But the Corvette shoots back out after getting spun around here, and unfortunately right into the path of Rexy, who makes pretty rough contact with them, but is able to carry on with some splitter damage. All things considered in this incident, I'm marking it as a racing incident. I hate to see incidents like these because this could definitely have been avoided by both of the drivers, but I don't think that one driver in particular is to blame here. The 14 was making a very bold move. Even if the 4 got on the brakes early, Ben Barnicoat made the decision to dive up the inside and go for that pass. Nicky Katzberg should not have come down. If he just maintains around the outside, there's a good chance that he could still keep the lead. But I think both drivers played a role in this incident. It's a racing incident. Now, important in this incident is after the fact, Nicky Katzberg would come out and post a tweet that even though I feel it was a big send, which often results in people coming together, I do believe this was more on me than on Ben. In my head, there was no overlap yet, but after reviewing the footage, there clearly was. So that pretty well sums it up. Sounds like just a misjudgment on the number 4 and an unfortunate way for their race to really come to an end. Next up was the incident that caused this chaos, the track blocking spin of the number 85 that caused a full course yellow pretty well immediately after the 14 car had that run in with the number 4. You can actually see the front bumper of the number 14 came off in this incident. But taking a look at what led up to this, we can see that the 85 and the 31 are nose to tail here, actually right behind the 5 and is that the 24, I believe, BMW that were also battling it out. But once we go forward here a few seconds, you can see the 31 dives out to the inside of the 85, trying to outbrake them going into turn 1. Goes in, kind of commits half, but we get a little bit of camera blur mess up here. But ultimately what happens is, the 31 is right there on the inside. The 85 right there as well ultimately gets spun around. We have a good view of this from the 31's perspective. See, here they go. They dive up the inside. Probably a late dive. You didn't really have any business making a dive up the inside here. You're not going to make a very successful attempt into turn 1 here. It was late. You could also say that the 85 didn't really help facilitate this pass at all. But ultimately, it's not really a corner where overtaking is going to take place, where you can facilitate a clean overtake. And ultimately, this was the result of it. The 31 just right into the back of the 85. Honestly, they might have made it through this corner here, but the 31 definitely didn't slow down enough. Looks like maybe they got into the inside wall there. Regardless, though, turns around the 85 and brings out the full course yellow. Imsa ruled this incident responsibility on the number 31. I'm going to agree with that, I think. I think the 31 was ultimately the car that created this incident, even though the 85 could have maybe done something to prevent the contact. Ultimately, there was no business making the dive up the inside here. Incident responsibility to the 31. Next up, we have another incident with the 31. This time, it's involving the number 5, the other customer Porsche. The number 5, a Proton Competition Porsche, the number 31 right there. They're both behind the number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura here. We can see they're side by side. This is just coming out of the turn 3 hairpin. And we can see that the 5 and the 31 make contact. The 5 goes hard into the wall, and they ultimately would go on to bring out a full course yellow. We can see that from this view, both of the cars are kind of angling into this next corner. Because we know that the next corner is that right-hand corner, pretty sharp right-hand corner. And both of these cars are both trying to make the apex a little bit better for that corner. Pretty difficult to go through there side by side. And then here you can still clearly see that the number 31 is very much angled this way. They have been the entire time. But the number 5 here, in my opinion, it looks like they're just cheating up the track a little bit. Getting a little bit closer to the 31 as they approach the corner. We can see here a great slow motion shot of this. Where again, the 5 just slowly moves into the 31. The 31 does a great job of holding their line. Nothing really that the 31 could have done in this moment. I think considering everything that happened in this incident and who got the worst end of it, number 5 was pretty self-policing. They got all the damage. The 31 didn't pick up any damage. It was pretty much a self-inflicted wound on the number 5. So I'm fine with there being no incident responsibility here, and the 31 definitely does not deserve a penalty. And then finally, our last ruling to make for this race, maybe one of the more difficult ones to make, was involving the number 9 and the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin. The number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche running in third at the time, trying to hold off the number 23, heading into the infamous turn 3 now, as we're gonna, all the incidents seem to have taken place here, the majority of them. We can see down the long back straightaway, the number 23 doesn't even really have a good run. This is a long way back that the 23 is coming from. I am not convinced here that the number 23, I don't think they were going to make that corner. They were able to slow down significantly by using the number 9 Pfaff almost said Pfaff Porsche, the number 9 Pfaff McLaren here. We can look at it again. They look pretty clearly to the outside. The Pfaff McLaren is defending the inside to try and prevent that move, but the number 23 here looks to go to the outside and then dives hard to the inside here. And it does kind of look like the number 9 makes a response, a move in response to the number 23 diving up the inside. I think if the 9 doesn't make this little jolt back to the left like that, then we're talking about a very clear-cut penalty for the number 23 here. But that definitely makes it a little bit more murky. The number 9 throwing arguably a block in the braking zone isn't going to help their cause, even though the number 23 was going to, in my opinion, blast into the back of them regardless. This isn't going to do them any favors with the stewards, and I think this is ultimately why we didn't end up seeing an incident responsibility penalty here for the number 23 doing this. That being said, I think this is a slightly different scenario than what we saw with the 14 and the 4 a few moments ago. I think the 23 was essentially going to drive through the 9, and I do not think that they would have made the corner without the number 9 being there. So in this instance, I would have given an incident responsibility penalty to the number 23, and that is my ruling. Look, at the end of the day, it's pretty clear that this track isn't suited for multi-class racing. It's so incredibly narrow, and there are so few passing opportunities that this number of incidents was bound to happen. I mean, it's so difficult to make a pass on somebody without making contact in one form or another. And look, I understand why this stop is on the calendar. It makes sense, but there has to be some sort of an alternative that's more appropriate for sports car racing to take place on than this. This being said, the drivers certainly don't get a free pass either. The complete lack of respect that they showed at times for their competitors was not great to watch. And the number of these overtake attempts that were more like just wild sends up the inside in some cases were completely avoidable, and exercising a little bit more patience would have prevented a lot of these incidents from actually occurring. Perhaps I'd be more willing to give some of the drivers a free pass on this one, but this has been a trend over the course of not just this season, but heading into last season as well. We've seen a little bit of the respect between some of the drivers break down, and ultimately it's led to an increase, in my opinion, of avoidable incidents. I think this combination of narrow track that's very difficult to pass at, and whether it's the lack of respect or lack of patience from some of the drivers, led to me not really enjoying this race, and it seems that a lot of you seem to agree with me. At the time of recording this, 66% of you thought it was a good race. That is by far the lowest percentage of the season, with at the time of recording this, it was about 50-50 split on the Twitter poll as to whether you liked this race. Alright, it sure was a messy race, and it caused a bit of a shakeup in some of the championship standings. Let's take a look at those standings presented by P1 Web Development. If you're looking for a custom website, then look no further than P1 Web Development. You can check them out at p1webdevelopment.com or click the first link in the description. In GTP, it's number 7 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 that still leads with 1,669 points. That is a 70-point lead on the 0-1 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac. However, if we look down the standings a little bit further, the top 5 cars are now separated by 139 points. The gap certainly has closed coming out of Detroit. In GTD Pro, the lead has increased a little bit for Rexy in the number 77 after they took their second straight win. They have 1,359 points. That's 84 more points than the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. The number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW, and the number 4 Corvette round out the top 5. It was a wild and chaotic race at Detroit this year, and guess what? It's going to be on the calendar next year as well. In fact, you can learn all about the 2025 Imsa schedule right here. A huge shout out to all of the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offintheesses or become a channel member by pressing the join button below. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.